Welcome, new and old friends. My name is 242, and today, 42 and 2 got me true scary stories. So, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. My family can remember their past lives. So one day, I told my son I was a girl who was murdered. He grinned and said, "What are the odds we'd meet again?" I've climbed Everest dozens of times, but I've never made it to the summit. I've begun using my own corpses as trail markers, attempting to reach the top before I freeze to death again. The Crying Woman by Ugly Little Mugbean. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning when I was browsing on YouTube. I had my earphones in, scrolling through the different videos of my usual YouTubers that I watch for entertainment. I always had trouble sleeping, so I always turned to videos in an attempt to make myself sleepy. I was halfway through a pretty funny and lighthearted video when I suddenly started to hear faint weeping growing louder and louder. I tried to figure out what was going on with the video. It didn't seem to be part of the music that was playing. I paused the video and still heard the weeping. I take out my earphones to listen more carefully and turn on my lamp next to my bed as I sat up. That's when I finally realized that it was coming from right outside my bedroom door and into the hallway where my other family members' bedrooms were. I sat there trying to think who it could be and figured it must have been my little brother who tried to get up for the toilet but got scared halfway through the hallway. Like a good big sister I was, I got up to get him. As I got closer to the door, it sounded like he was right outside my bedroom. I grabbed the handle and turned, making a clicking sound. A startled gasp could be heard and the crying stops. I peeked into the hallway expecting to see my brother, but no one was there. I proceeded to check on all my family members. I figured maybe I heard my mom or little sister, who might have been the one behind the weeping and sobs. Goosebumps scattered all over my body to my disturbance. Everyone was deep asleep. I was the only one awake. The next few days, I kind of forgot about that night. Soon, everything slowly went back to normal, so it seemed. That is until a few weeks later, on one night around 9 p.m., usually when my brother and sister would go to sleep for school, I was still awake doing my usual scrolling through YouTube when my little brother came into my room looking half asleep and concerned. I asked him what was wrong. He replied, "Are you okay, sissy?" "What do you mean?" I looked at him with a confusing look. He then went on to explain to me that my crying had woke him up. He then walked back to his room. I'm a little bit ashamed to admit this, but I slept in my sister's room that night. Even though this all happened earlier this year, I still feel uncomfortable being in my own room, and I feel this weird, intense, heavy feeling in my chest. I haven't heard the woman's cry since, but sometimes, out of nowhere, I feel like crying too. As the rescuers' boat approached the flooding building, they managed to rescue a frantic dog just in time before the water began to rise. Timmy, exhausted from hours of screaming for help, awoke to find his faithful companion gone, leaving him stuck, cold, and alone. I Think My Town is Haunted by Ugly Little Mugbean. With the last story I posted about the crying woman, I started to seriously think about looking into my town's history. I live in Western Australia in a small mine town in the Pilbara. For my own safety reasons, I will not disclose the name of the town. Instead, we'll call it Wilkins. Taking place shortly after the crying woman happened, I slowly started to open up about the spooky experiences to my fellow friends I have. I was expecting the usual underwhelming responses like, "Oh yeah, that's creepy," and then moving on to the next topic. To my surprise, they shared their own spooky experiences with me. One of them told me that when he first moved to Wilkins, he had the opportunity to work night shifts at Kohl's. Usually it's only him, his manager, and 2 more employees for the night to clean and restock the whole store. When he started working there, he expressed his concerns straight away to his family that he was being watched, along with the misplacements of the box cutters and pens, and find them in odd and dangerous places. Like his box cutter, one of his co-workers was stacking the highest shelf when the box cutter fell onto them, having the blade out, almost cutting their face. Even though he is certain he has had them on him at all times since, he was always consistent on having things in order, since the manager was pretty strict on keeping everything in check to not lose work supplies. One night shift, he was desperately trying to finish restocking some produce down an aisle since they were short-staffed, it only being himself and the manager, plus it was close to clocking off for the night. He would usually have his earphones in playing music when he worked, so when he heard a man's voice growling right in his ear, "Not there," he spun around, startled to find no one. He tried to shrug it off as hearing things. That is until when he turned around to grab the next box, he found it at the end of the aisle looking like someone had just thrown it. As he tried to make sense of what just happened, he knew it was impossible to be his manager as she only works in the back of the store. My other friend, she told me quite a few examples of what she has witnessed. She would do house sitting as a gig to earn some quick cash. Then she would use the money to go out for the weekends to the pub regularly. Many times when she house sits, there will be some pets she has to look after too. Things that would happen usually, she would see a figure on the corner of her eye moving, and sometimes see them sitting in the corner of a room, misplacing things when she was sure she had placed it elsewhere, seeing the cats and the dogs growling, hissing and barking at nothing, and not going into certain rooms of the house. She mentioned sometimes that the radio or TV would turn off at certain times of the day, along with the lights turning off in a strange pattern as if someone was walking around the house turning them off as they go. During the day, she would take the owner's dog for a stroll around the town. Even in a busy little quarantine town, the air felt eerie and otherworldly still. One experience she told me, however, is one I will not forget easily. After a night out of having a drink or two, she was ready to go home. In a smart routine, she called some of her friends and her parents to pick her up and drop her off home. But this particular night, no one answered. She decided to walk home as she couldn't be bothered waiting for someone to answer their phone. As she walked home, she could feel herself getting more sober by the minute. She felt that her chest was tightening up, making her feel panicked. She thought she was having an anxiety attack. She continuously kept looking behind and around her, explained that she felt like she was being followed. After a while of walking, she stopped and sat down on the curb of the road, tried calling again as she figured it was safer. Dialing numbers after numbers, but to no avail. Softly in the distance, she heard soft cries and groans, along with the sound of chains or shackles being moved against each other in a rhythm. As she looked up, she saw across the road was a park. The longer she looked, she noticed dozens of dark, shadowy figures emerging from the trees. each one different in size and shape, slowly walking around and looked hunched over. Frozen in fear, she desperately tries to get up to run, but only starts crawling as fast as she could away from the park. The shackles crackling together, growing louder and louder along with groans and wailing sobs. She notices a separate clank of shackles coming from behind her. Too afraid to look, she manages to finally get up and run. She ran to the nearest house and banged on the door. The people inside were a couple with a few kids and were kind enough to drop her home. She never told her parents, or anyone else for that matter, because she didn't want to be criticized and be made fun of by little Jab saying she was an alcoholic and just seeing things. After hearing the stories of my friends' haunting experiences, I decided to do a bit of digging and asking around in Wilkins. To my own discovery, almost everyone I spoke with has their own unique story to share, yet they all had a similar theme. Each of their stories, they are mentioned hearing sobs, cries, and the clanking of shackles. I don't really understand how this all could be and how similar the stories are with each other. I think my town is haunted. He twisted the revolver, put the barrel against his head, and pulled the trigger. Click. But nothing happened. He began to cry because the thing which killed his parents just a few minutes ago knows that he's here. My girlfriend and I are a perfect match. Even though she doesn't want to make a donation, I'll have 2 brand new kidneys by the week's end. Turn right in 100 feet. A vehicle whizzed past me in the opposite direction, flashing their lights and honking their horns. I realized the voices in my head were now mimicking the stat nav in their effort to kill me. She was dead, and I didn't even know it. By Anonymous. About 5 years ago, I was living at home with my parents, and my twin brother was there too. Every morning at about 7 a.m., we both head out for a run. We had mapped out a giant loop that we would run. To make it a bit of a competition, I would run in one direction and my twin would run in the other direction. That way we could run and stay focused. Part of this loop was on the main street of the city my parents lived in. On this main street, there was these shady apartments kind of hidden by a bunch of trees. The direction I was running, the view of these apartments was obscured by a giant hedge bush, and I couldn't see the apartments until I was right in front of them. Out of my peripherals, I see a woman standing among the trees, staring at me. I immediately get the chills and do not turn to face her, because I didn't want to be rude. So I run on and forget about this a few minutes later. I pass my twin about 10 minutes later, and he's going the opposite direction as I. I get home, and my twin isn't back yet, so I go about the rest of my morning routine, including taking a shower. I get out of the shower, and my twin hasn't come back yet, and I'm starting to get a bit worried. An hour later, I had gotten home. He's still not back, and I called him. He tells me he's on his way back, and he has something he needs to tell me and my parents. He finally gets home and tells us he's running in front of these apartments. He saw a woman hanging from the tree in front of this apartment. As soon as it's obvious he's seen her, a man comes sprinting from the apartment, wailing and screaming, "No, I can't believe she did this!" and grabs her body and lays her on the ground and starts performing CPR. It's obvious he is her husband. My brother calls the local police and they dispatch an ambulance and police officers. My brother had to stay for questioning as a witness report and all that jazz. He is obviously troubled by it. since he has going the opposite way that I was running. He didn't have a hedge obscuring his view and got a straight-on view of this woman hanging there. It's still hard for me to believe that that woman I saw staring at me out of my peripherals was dead the entire time. I do find it very sketchy that the husband came running out as soon as it was obvious that someone had discovered the body. That's a bit too convenient if you ask me. But I don't want to say this man killed his wife without any evidence. My brother is never followed up with the police, leading me to believe this death was ruled a suicide. I still can't fathom that if I had just turned to face the woman, I would have discovered her about 20 minutes earlier than my twin had, and it deeply troubles me that I didn't. So before we continue, OP did send me photos of where this took place, so I'm just going to show those to you. So the first one is nothing on it, so you can kind of get an idea of what this place looked like. Now here's the second one, and you can see that he circled where the trees are and where he was running from, and yeah, I could see it being harder to kind of see a body in those trees, and also how it would be easier coming from the other direction to see it. So yeah, I get exactly why he didn't see, and I get why he didn't look either. So let's continue on our stories. I clutched the negative pregnancy test in my shaking hands, willing it to say something different. As I watched my swollen stomach contour and bulge and the shape of an unfamiliar limb, I had to accept that whatever was growing in me, it wasn't a baby. What the F are you looking at? By Fallout 69. Good night, everyone. I am a longtime fan/lurker and a first-time poster. This story is fresh, as it just happened a few minutes ago, but I will try my best to give you all the details. So, I'm a Pokemon Go player. I was a mild fan of the franchise as a kid, and now in my mid-20s, I find that it allows me to get out of the house more often and do something that doesn't involve, well, my house. If you have played the game, you know that there's these places called gyms, where you can place one of your Pokemon to earn you a max of 50 in-game coins per 24 hours. These coins can buy important in-game items as well as cosmetic items, and as you have guessed, it's quite the popular feature in the game. However, since I live in a huge European city, there are many players to compete with in order to secure a spot at these gyms. The reason I'm telling you all of this is to let you know why in the world would I brave a cold winter of my metropolitan city at 3 a.m. You see, it's not just that I'm stupid, it's also because I know most folks are asleep, which in turns allows me to quickly defeat all the Pokemon in the gyms and place my own. I have been doing this for a few months, and I have been quite successful. So tonight the routine was the same. Got dressed, got my coat, my scarf, and my black leather gloves. I went out and made my way to the first of the 3 gyms in my area that I usually conquer in the game. It's actually quite fascinating to observe the people that wander the city at these hours. Well, tonight I was going to meet a special guy. I arrived at my first gym, which is a smallish street that curves to the right for quite a stretch. I emptied it and placed my own Pokemon inside. Afterwards, I lingered around the area, taking off a glove to scratch my hand, but overall, just managing the game and looking things up. Some cars go by, and that's when I see him. This guy, clearly over 180 centimeters, making his way down the street. Now, these are just my country standards, but everything about him screamed, "Thug, ready to knife you." Sporting a black cap at night, concealing his face with the shadow. Padded black jacket with dirty blue jeans and rip-off Timberland boots. My immediate reaction was to keep it cool and neutral and just calmly place my cell phone back in my pocket. As he passed me, he gave me the "What the F you looking at?" look, and I couldn't help but give back a small sideways glance as I put my gloves back on my hand. I started walking towards the next gym, which happened to be the same direction he was walking towards, and he, to my surprise, started speeding up. Then he pulled out his cell phone and tried to phone someone. This immediately reminded me of my girlfriend, as this is a common tactic she uses when she feels she's being followed by strangers. Whoever he tried to phone, however, did not pick up. He looked back at me, keeps walking, increasingly faster. He switches sides and allows the parked cars to get between me and him, and then abruptly he stops. He turns around and asks, "Hey friend, you know where I can find the transportation at this hour?" I'm awkwarded out and freaked out at the same time. So without even looking at him, I just said, "At this hour? Only an Uber." He started walking, only when I walked past him. Then it hit me. From my perspective, he was a thug-looking dude that could have very well tried to rob me and potentially harm me. But from his perspective, I'm a 171 centimeter dude in his mid-20s that, for some reason, decided to pocket his phone the moment he went past. Then I gave him a sideways, "What the F are you looking at?" glance as he put his black leather gloves on and started following him, with not a single person awake around, looking like a hitman or a serial killer. As anxious as I was, he must have been terrified enough to try to phone someone, or pretend to, and then initiate dialogue with a total stranger at 3 a.m., just to be sure that I wasn't psycho about to knife him. We walked together in the same direction for about 10 minutes after that without looking or talking to one another. Just two awkward guys who did not want to meet one another ever again. So, thug guy, I won't follow you like a serial killer, and you won't meet me ever again. My mom was frantically trying to stop me from swinging around the pink lightsaber that I found in her bedroom drawers. That is, until I swung it at her and her headless body fell to the ground. The Night I Learned Not to Sneak Out by Muskie Bam. To start this off, I like to give a bit of context. This happened 4 years ago. I am a girl, and at the time this happened, I was 12 going on 13 in just a month or two. The friend I mentioned in this story was 14 at the time. The friend, Sally, who I was staying with that night, was quite a bit older than me. At least at the time, the 2 years age gap was quite big. I was about to start my second year of middle school, whereas Sally should have been about to begin her sophomore year of high school. I met her in the beginning of my first year at my new school. She was older than the other kids in our grade and was considered one of the popular kids. And I think that was what drew me to her first. We became fast friends, and before we knew it, we were spending every single weekend together. Seriously, every single weekend. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. It was your typical Friday night. We carpooled to her family's apartment after school. I've always been a picky eater, so when her family had dinner, I didn't eat with them. I just snacked on the Pop-Tart that I had stowed away in my backpack in case they ordered something I wouldn't eat. Something to note is that her family was pretty religious. I wouldn't go as far as to say they were fanatic, but they didn't allow their kids to watch horror movies or anything that was rated PG or older. It didn't stem from the desire to protect them from anything inappropriate. Sally's mom had an irrational fear that scary movies had satanic messages. We asked to watch The Purge, and her mom obviously said no. After some negotiation, she agreed to let us watch Hunger Games instead. After the movie, Sally and I went to hang out in her room. She put on some music, and being the age we were, we gave each other makeovers. By the end of it, we looked much older than just 12 and 14. This part of the night is when things started to seem off to me. Sally wasn't the most positive influence. Despite being my best friend at the time, she was manipulative and got off on putting me down. She had a habit of talking to men online and lying about her age. Sally showed me some texts between her and the man she was talking to. I couldn't give you an exact recount of them, but they consisted of him trying to convince her to meet up with him, and just the usual things you expect from a creep online. According to him, he was 19, tall, and blonde with soulful blue eyes. Once I saw the texts, I asked if she had a picture of him. Something didn't sit right with me after seeing the messages. She showed me what he looked like, and he was very clearly not 19. This man was at least 40 and looked like he lived in his mom's basement. Then we got a call from him. Sally answered without hesitation, and when I heard the voice on the other end of the call, I felt like I was going to get sick. "You're so pretty. Why don't you come meet me?" he asked. Sally said that she couldn't because she was spending the night with a friend. The mention of that sparked his interest, and then he proceeded to try and ask us both to meet him. Sally, lacking any common sense, said yes. Thus began her plan for us to sneak out and walk 15 blocks to meet him in a deserted McDonald's parking lot. I didn't want to go. I was raised on stories of what happens to teenage girls who meet random men from the internet in person. But after adamant pleading from Sally that she didn't feel safe going by herself, I agreed. We took our phones with us for the walk. I had a kitchen knife stuffed in my bra in case something were to happen and I needed to defend myself. The route we had to take to get there didn't have many street lamps, and there weren't any houses. We were surrounded by trees on both sides of us. When we got to the parking lot, the only car parked nearby was a black beat-up 2000 Toyota Corolla. The car was still running when we got there, and from what we could tell, there was more than one person inside. The man from the picture got out of the front passenger seat and left the door open behind him before approaching us. I turned my flash on so I could see, and he was obviously on something. I couldn't tell you what kind of drug it was for the life of me, but his eyes were so wide and they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. He was jittery and kept twitching. I became very conscious of how big he was. Maybe 6'2", around 280 pounds. For reference, my friend and I did not look our age, even without makeup. I'm about 5'2", my friend was pretty tall, probably about 5'6", 5'7". We were both significantly smaller than him. The man reached out for us and caught my friend by the arm. I went to get my knife as quickly as I could, and that's when I saw his friend getting out of the car. He invited us back to his car and offered us booze and drugs. But after seeing my knife and that I was ready to call the police, he released my friend. I took Sally's arm and ran faster than I ever had in my entire life. We took the long way home to avoid them finding out where we lived in case they were following us. Once we got there, her family was still sound asleep. We locked all the doors, closed the blinds, and blocked him on everything. There wouldn't be any sleeping that night. We were constantly peeking out the window, and to our dismay, the same Toyota was circling around her apartment building. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. I never mentioned any of this to my parents out of fear of getting grounded or in trouble. I'm 16 now, and they still have no clue. I still get nervous when I see a car similar to that one from that night. As for Sally, her parents never found out either. We agreed never to speak about it again. Thankfully, she moved into a new house just a few weeks after that happened. Safe to say, Sally and I haven't spoken in 3 years. She was ticked at me for ruining her night, and our friendship didn't last for long after that. We had a pretty bad falling out, but looking back on it now, it was definitely for the better. So, to Sally, thank you for teaching me a very valuable lesson and making me realize that some people are best just left alone. And to the man and his friend who tried to prey upon 2 young girls, let's not ever meet again. When I found a body while out on a hike, it wasn't the body that scared me. It was the fact the body looked just like me. "Let me go," I cried, wrenching my arm out of his grip. "I don't care that the doctor says he can't find a pulse. I just want to go home already." A council worker let slip my house was being scooped for a burglar. By Sturs Kampfel Zerg 1. When I was a younger boy, in my early teenage years, my mom had a family of white Siberian tigers which stood in the living room facing out the windows onto the street. They ranged from small plush ones to a large real-life like animal white Siberian tiger. Usually, they received comments when people passed by, but she had arranged them to stand together like a family. It was winter time, and some of the houses on my street had already been targeted by people with various belongings being stolen, ranging from couches to money in jars to a personalized angel in someone's house, which was made for their daughter who had been a stillborn. There was a council of workers working on a hill corner fixing pavements. Sometimes, if you passed by, they would talk to you for a short period, just to be friendly, since we were young. I was out one night with a friend, and we were talking to them about houses being targeted around the area, when one of the workers turned it into a joke and said through laughter, "If it were me, I would go for the house on my street. They obviously are loaded, man." Knowing we were staying on that street, we curiously inquired which house he was talking about. Then he said quite bluntly and in a matter-of-fact tone, "The one with the tigers in the window. Could make that easy. It always looks empty." I was obviously a young and naive. I didn't fully understand, so I said quite proudly, "That's my house." He stopped what he was doing and just stared at us for what could have been a few short minutes. Then he said, "There you go. You just never know who you're talking to. It's a small world." Then started laughing. I forgot all about this until someone tried to break into our house a few weeks before Christmas. We didn't know anyone personally who was involved, but when they were caught weeks after trying another house, people said it was the council workers who done it. They apparently weren't really workers, but using it as an excuse because no one can remember seeing a van. And they all wore plain clothes and high-vis vests without a logo on the back. Mom always said she wanted to die before her kids. As the doctor read my diagnosis, I realized I'd have to grant her wish myself. Unsettling 911 Call. True Story by Bernd Schmidt. My cousin was a 911 operator for a town in my city. She had many scary calls and violent situations where people were either seriously injured or even died. Many overdoses, many domestic violence calls, some from the same woman over and over, which was heartbreaking. However, there was one which was still shrouded in mystery, which she claims to be the most unsettling of them all. The call went something like this. 911, what's your emergency? I need the police. What's the address of your emergency? 1234 Laura Hill Drive. And what's the nature of your emergency? There's someone in my room. Can you speak up, miss? It's in my room. Somebody's in your house, ma'am? Something. Can you speak up? It's in my doorway. Has someone broken in? Caller hangs up. She tries to call back, but it just rings. Police arrive quickly. Call was tracked from inside the house of this address. But when they arrived, the lights were out inside and the doors were locked. Police have no cause to break in, and upon checking the windows and doors, there was no evidence of intrusions. They had my cousin continue to call while they tried to listen, but nothing. They wrote it off as a prank call. I'm not sure what it is about this story. It's not outrageous or violent. It's very short and to the point. To this day, it remains a mystery, but something about the way she tells it is extremely bothering. She said it undeniably wasn't a prank call because the girl on the other end seemed terrified. The house was empty at the time and in the process of being sold. Mommy always screams when I show up inside the house soaking wet. She keeps telling me she doesn't want me to die, but I know she hears me crying for help when I was drowning in our pool. Butterfly Effect. How German Engineering Saved Me from Being Murdered. By Cecil McKinley. This is going to take me a while to explain everything, so stay with me. It all comes around. My very first car was a dark green 2000 Volkswagen Jetta. It was the most basic of basics when it comes to cars. No options whatsoever except for an automatic transmission. It was $300, slow, dumpy, no right headlight, and drove straight with the steering wheel practically sideways. Every stereotype of a poor high schooler's car you can think of, my car was no exception. Despite it being a piece of German crap, I loved that car. I drove it every chance I had. I don't think a day went by that I didn't drive it. I named it Thunder Bunny. She was my baby, my beautiful green baby. But Volkswagens from that generation, Jenna's especially, had a pretty bad flaw in the automatic transmission. I'm not sure exactly what caused it, but essentially the transmission generally got worse and worse until the car would not shift into third gear. And there's not a thing you can do about it there. So, a couple weeks after Halloween 2019, I was going about 30 miles per hour when the engine suddenly roared, and the car wouldn't speed up. I feared the worst, and my fear was justified. My dad, a mechanic, didn't even have hope for my baby. She was gone already, and so, much to my dismay, we started looking for a new car. It only took us a month to find her, a dark green 1999 Volkswagen Jetta. Exactly like my old car, but absolutely everything. She was faster, had heated leather seats, automatic windows, auto sunroof, everything. All except for an automatic transmission. I know how to drive manual, so it was perfect. I had a new baby, from a crackhead neighbor girl to Scarlett Johansson. At least in my eyes. I loved that car even harder, named it Little Boy, and was happy. Okay, I'm about to get to the story, but I have a few more quick things to explain. You can skip this if you want. It's important, but it's not vital to the story. First, for people who might not know, but when you have a manual car, you cannot leave it in gear and take your foot off the clutch. If you do, the car will stall, which is bad. So if you do leave your car in gear, you need to turn the engine off before taking your foot off the clutch. If you don't want to turn the car off or have it turn itself off, you need to put the handbrake or it will roll away. Guess what was the only really broken thing on my car was at this point this story takes place. If you guessed handbrake, you're right. And that was the second thing. No handbrake. Okay, now to the story. I started working as a pizza delivery driver in a smaller growing town in Michigan. It was good money, but every once in a while I delivered to an incredibly sketchy place and have had a few shotguns pulled on me. One night, about 2 months ago, I was delivering on a Friday. Usually Fridays are very busy, but this day was a little slow. So when a delivery came at 8:30 and half an hour before we closed, I jumped on it. I realized it was 7.1 miles away, so all the closing jobs would be done by the time I got back, and I would have been able to leave immediately. It was way out of town in a wood surrounding neighborhood, but again, no work when I get back to the store? Seems like a good deal to me. And I'm all about those sort of deals. And so I climbed in my car and went to drive 7.1 miles away. As I pulled up to the house, I began to get a bad feeling. The house was in a small trailer park type neighborhood next to a lake. The kind that the house are all good distance apart with likely drug problems and was completely dark. No lights inside, none inside. There was a single car in the driveway and an open window on the side of the house. I pulled in behind the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment. Something was off. By the house being completely dark, I mean, there wasn't so much as a nightlight that I could use. Usually, when I deliver in a dark house, there's at least a light on the upstairs or something that would signal that someone was awake, waiting for their pizza. But the house seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in gear, turned off the engine, grabbed the small, cheapest pizza we had, and got out. Without my headlights on, there was nothing. I could barely see the house. The only light was the dim moon. I walked onto the porch and past the big open window in the front door. As I reached the front door, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open, just enough for me to see inside the void of the house. Thinking of every single horror movie I have ever seen, I said aloud, "F that," and hurried back to my car. I am a tall, well-built looking guy, but despite my wide shoulders and baggy hoodie, I am a frail thing. I can barely handle fighting off a small dog. I got into my car and turned on the engine, my headlight illuminating the house, and almost simultaneously, the living room light behind the big open window lit up and a single guy looked out and walked to the front door. I cursed myself and weighed my options. If I went up to the door, I could die. If I noped out of there, I would be 110% chance of being fired. That meant no new car parts, no gas money, no cute dates with my girl, just sitting at home doing virtual schoolwork. It was a stupid choice, I know, but I grabbed the pizza and opened my door, making a choice I damn glad I made. I took the car out of gear and climbed out, mostly so my engine would still be running so that if I needed, I could run back and immediately take off. I walked to the door where the man had opened the rest of the way. As I got closer, I got a good look at him. I'm not one to judge a person based on their physical appearance, but this guy's head was cleanly shaven and was covered in tattoos. He was wearing a pair of gray jeans and a white tank top. He had a scowl on his face and was staring me dead in the eyes. I looked past him for a moment into the house, which was completely empty. As I got close enough that I started opening the pizza box, he started reaching around to his waist. I stopped. He just stared at me with the most evil grin I have ever seen. I knew in that moment that I was about to die. I had always heard your life seems to flash before your eyes. I thought about my girl, that she wouldn't know what had happened. My work would stop delivering upon my disappearance, assuming that my body wasn't ever found. My dad would regret telling me he was happy for me landing this job. God save thee. That's when I heard it, the distant sound of gravel under my tires. My only practically small chance of escape was rolling away. I didn't even look back at my car to know that. I just stared at the man and was about to say, "F you." When he looked back at my car, I heard the sound of the car rolling. It was getting closer? The guy's eyes went from the driveway to behind me. I finally looked over my shoulder. My car was rolling backwards and had come to a smooth stop near the mailbox of the house. I looked back at the guy, who had a nervous look. He looked back at me and scowled again and took his hand from around his waist. He reached into his front pocket and took out $12 and handed it to me. I gave him the pizza and watched them slam the door shut. I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off to get in. I looked back at the house and the man was standing in the front of the window, staring at me. You better believe I nearly spun the tires on my way out of there. I kept glancing at my mirrors until I started driving under street lamps. It was easily the scariest moment I have ever had. As soon as I got back to the store, I told my boss about it, and she called the police. We never heard anything about it. I'm assuming they went to the house and only found a small cheese pizza. I started carrying a knife on me at all times, and my boss is considering getting a tracker on our pizza bags. I only recently realized this is sort of the butterfly effect. I thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to me that my transmission went out, and I cursed Volkswagen for designing such a terrible automatic transmission. But if the transmission was still working, then I would have still had that car when this happened. I would have put the car in park, and it would have sat there with whatever would have happened to me happened. I have zero doubts in my mind that that man was planning on murdering me. So, Crappy German engineering saved me from getting murdered. Edit. I'm assuming that when the car began to roll, the guy assumed there was someone inside, backing up to pick me up. The engine wasn't revving, but it was about to murder a person. You probably don't focus on details. Sorry for any confusion. Alice stared at the table in Wonderland, thinking, then hastily gobbled up the cake labeled Eat Me, and washed it down with a potion labeled Drink Me. Her blood-curdling scream was heard all through Wonderland as her skeleton began to grow, but the rest of her body shrank. My parents offered to buy me an electric wheelchair after the accident, but I refused as I felt it would make me look weak. I cursed my own arrogance as my arms were beginning to tire and the sound of the undead behind me getting closer. My mom and I probably prevented a kidnapping, or worse, by Comrade Snowball 45. This was quite a while ago. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and my dream was to be an archaeologist when I grew up. As luck would have it, a friend of my mom's knew someone that was an actual, real-life archaeologist. Imagine my excitement. I was expecting an Indiana Jones type. Instead, she was a 20-something postgraduate female student that worked at my city's Natural History Museum. I met her at a gathering that my mom's friend threw, and I started to talk to her about my interest in the field. I think she found my fascination with her area charming as she invited me over to the research section of the museum so that I could look at things that weren't open to the public. It was a very cool experience, which I greatly enjoyed. The creepy part came after the visit was over. As a way to thank my new archaeologist friend for the tour, my mom offered her a ride back to her house, which she accepted. At this point, it was maybe 8 o'clock. I don't really remember, but the point is that it was already dark out. When we arrived at her house, we noticed that there was a person waiting in a car with all the lights off right in front of her driveway. The archaeologist seemed kinda creeped out by this, especially since her roommate wasn't in town, and so my mom told her not to worry and that they would wait until she entered her house before we left. She exited the car and went into her home without any incident. However, as soon as she closed the door, the parked car, still without any lights, drove off in a hurry, with the tires screeching and everything. Even though this might seem kinda uneventful, it's still really creepy to think about what would have happened if I hadn't been invited to the museum and if my mom hadn't offered her a ride back to her house that day. I waved a tearful goodbye as my lover left the bunker, promising he'd be back as soon as he could with food for me and our newborn baby. But his phone fell out of his pocket when he was climbing the ladder to leave. And with how many notifications he's gotten from family and friends in the last hour, I started to wonder if there was even a nuclear war at all. Unknown Man Follows Me in the Dark by Elder Squirrel. I live in Finland, in a fairly small city, and this happened to me a year ago when I was 14. So it was Friday evening, and on every Friday our mom let us go to the store and buy candy. So me and my 12-year-old sister left our house to go to the store, and it was already dark outside. We made our way to the closest store, which was over a mile away. At some point, there was a man behind us, walking the same way. But I don't think much about it at the time. He could have just been going to the same store. So I continue chatting with my sister while the man is behind us, following us at a safe distance. We get to the store with no complication, and the man followed us into the store. We take our time selecting our candy and get to the register to pay. While I was packing the candy into my backpack, I saw this man buying some chocolate bars. Pretty far to go for chocolate bars, I thought, and at this point my suspicions started to rise for this guy. I get out of the store with my sister and we start making our way back. We walked a while and quickly glanced at my back, and the man was still there, following us. I took a look at my sister, who seemed totally unaware about the man's presence. We continued our walk, and up ahead of us was an unlit dirt road that continued for a good part of the trip. So I looked at my back again, and the man was still there, about 60 feet away. At this point, I was almost certain that he was following us because on our way to the store, he did not walk this part of the way behind us. The dirt road goes through a forest, and it had a curve at the start of it. Once we got to the curve, I looked back and noticed that the man couldn't see us, so I pulled my sister to the woods, and we ducked down in the woods. My sister starts saying something, and I just whisper, "Stay quiet," to her, and I wait for the man to continue. I could see the man's shadow coming down the road, and he started looking for us from the road. He walked back and forth on the road. Now, I was certain he was following us all that time. My heart was racing, and I tried to be as quiet as possible. The man didn't find us, but he did continue running forward. We stayed in the forest for a while before getting the courage to come out. We walked the rest of the way to our home with no problems and get to our house. We eat our candy and have a good evening. But that really did bother me for a while, and especially my sister. Thinking about this still gives me chills, and the thought of getting caught in that situation creeps me out, and I try not to think about it. I wouldn't want to meet this guy again. Typical Friday night, screams and loud music from the disco bar across the street makes it hard to catch sleep. Decades after the fire incident, you can still smell the smoke and hear their cries for help. I didn't order pizza by Anonymous. This happened quite a while ago when I was home alone with just my dog. After all this time, I'm sure what happened was really strange, and I have no idea what this man actually wanted. So I was watching TV one night at about 11 p.m. when I heard a car pull up outside and the engine shut off. I figured it was obviously a neighbor, but nosy dog wanted to have a look and went to the window. He kinda messed up the blinds when he went to look, so I got up to fix them. When I did, I noticed a car parked on the street across from my house and my neighbor's house. I couldn't really make out any details, but it looked like the driver was still sitting in the car. I didn't really think anything of it. I got a drink and went back to watch TV. Quite a while had passed since I fixed the blinds, but I'm not sure how long. I'm going to guess 15 to 20 minutes. Out of nowhere, I thought I heard a tapping at the door. Not a knock. It was much lighter and very quiet. My dog had sat up to look at the door, and I paused the TV when the same tapping then started on the window. I opened the blinds a little and saw a man standing there. I couldn't make out his face properly, and he immediately walked back to the door and started tapping at it again. This doesn't sound very frightening, and I'm not sure why, but suddenly I had a really awful feeling.
I felt absolutely terrified and had no idea why. The tapping at the door never stopped, but something in my head was saying if I opened the door to him, then something really bad would happen. I went upstairs to open the window to ask him what he wanted. It felt safer doing this. He said in a really quiet voice he was delivering pizza and told me how much it cost. I felt so stupid for being frightened and told him I didn't order a pizza. I guess he was speaking quietly and knocked lightly so he didn't disturb my neighbors. My dog had followed me upstairs and was letting out the odd growl and bark, which isn't really unusual for him. I was trying to shush him when the man downstairs told me he had the correct address and I better get downstairs now and open the door to pay what I owed and collect my food before it got cold. I was really confused because I most definitely didn't order any food and began telling him that again when I noticed he didn't have a pizza. He wasn't carrying anything at all. I told him again that he had the wrong address and he got really angry. He kept telling me to open the door. He was going between angry and soft of trying to persuade me to go back downstairs. I asked him where the pizza was. He said he was holding it. It was really dark, but he definitely didn't have anything in his hands. My dog was really making quite a bit of fuss at this point, and the stranger had turned into a broken record. Come downstairs, open the door, come downstairs, and open the door. All the noise must have alerted my neighbor, who did open his front door, and the man didn't say a word, but practically ran across the street to the car that I had heard pull up a while ago. He went back to the car empty-handed. I have no idea what he wanted, but he certainly wasn't a delivery driver. It really freaked me out, as well as my dog was quite obviously a large breed and the man saw him through the window. He wasn't deterred at all. It seems even stranger and less random that he actually drove to my house as though he planned on showing up. After finally having no choice but to kill her to eat her, he saw something that sickened him. Land. My Plenty of Fish Nightmare by some girl from Saskatchewan. When I just finished college, I was living in a one-bedroom townhouse split. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, and at the time, I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy. He was really good looking, said he had a good job, nice teeth, don't you judge me, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like them to take care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there, I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date, we said goodbye, and I got in my car and began to drive away. I realized right away he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway? He didn't. My exit was coming up and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine. And when I pulled out the exit, I noticed he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to breathe and decide, okay, hoop it, I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered and was getting ready for bed. and started feeling dumb because, like, was that really him? Am I overreacting? Do I ask him if he was following me? Like, just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination. Or so I thought. I decided I was going to message him and just said, "Had a good time, good night." And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through my phone of a picture of my car outside my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest. I started shaking. I didn't know what to say. And he texted me and said, "I didn't know you lived across the street from me." I've met my neighbors, and not once have I met him. There is a huge apartment complex kitty corner to the townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived. I don't know. I popped up and went to look outside, and there he was, standing there outside, like he was waiting for me. I opened the door, and he asked if he could come in, and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him I was exhausted, and I'd rather just crash out as it had been a long day. The next morning, I woke up to go to work, and my windshield had been smashed, my car was keyed, my back 2 tires were slashed, and as I noticed the damage to my vehicle, the guy came out of his car with 2 coffees and is like, "Oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee." So again, I'm like freaking out. I called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, don't get in that car. So I called my boss, told him the situation, and explained I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the whole time. By the way, when the police finally got there, this guy was acting really suspicious. He walked away and was like hiding on the other side of his car. I filed the report and the police basically said, "Hope you have insurance," and were on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner and all I heard was the sirens on the cop's light turn on, and the cops scream, "Freeze, put your hands in the air and get down on your knees." I looked and the cop's got his gun drawn at this guy, and this dude is like on the ground getting arrested. I spoke with a cop after he got into the back, and he explained he was wanted for stalking, breach of prohibition, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shocked. It took me a couple days to get over the hypothetical situations that I could have been in. About a week later, I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting on my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on condition until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but I'd call him when I was done work. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment in another area of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friend to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move it to my new place because I was so scared this dude would follow them while moving. So that's my horror story of the first time I used Plenty of Fish. Dunkin' Donuts Terrorist by Lawyers Guns Money 90. Got some Dunkin' this morning, and it brought this story back to my mind. Figure I'd share it here. During high school and college, I worked at Dunkin' Donuts for about 7 years and bounced around to a few different locations. I was used to working at the Dunkins in my town, where we get the yeast rings delivered periodically and frost them ourselves as needed. I transferred to a new shop about a half an hour from my house with all the same responsibilities except for the donuts. They were delivered by corporate and they arrived frosted almost perfectly. They looked like the plastic donuts they show on the commercials. Always round and not squished together, and they would dip them in the frosting so it was evenly spread and neat. It was a busy Saturday morning and it was close to Valentine's Day, so we had a fresh order brownie battered donuts delivered that morning. We were slammed, which was normal for the weekends, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to see my manager, who I'll call Jeremy, running around stressed out. When he first ran past me, I didn't think anything of it, and I continued making sandwiches at the sandwich station. He rushed by carrying a pastry tray, and I watched him begin frantically throwing something in the trash, looking worried as hell. At first, I laughed and just said, "Jeremy, what the heck are you doing?" He straightened out and looked absolutely beside himself. I have never seen Jeremy look so lost, so I asked him what was going on and if something was wrong. Someone filled the brownie battered donuts with staples. He told me that he got a phone call from corporate that one of the stores in our chain, which contains 10, had somehow discovered multiple staples in every donut in their order. That was at least 48 donuts for our store and more or less for the other 9, depending on their sales. They told Jeremy that we had to get rid of the most recent delivery because whoever put the batter in the filler dumped a ton of staples in it as well. Thankfully, we hadn't sold any of the previous order yet from the morning because it was still relatively early. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was going to get sick. What if a young child had gotten one of them? I pictured some family sitting at home on Saturday morning, going out to get some drinks and donuts for the kids, and imagining everything else that could have happened after. I never found out what came of it, and as far as I know, neither did my boss. I'm assuming nothing happened because thankfully I never heard anything on the news. Makes me wonder if there was a cover-up, and I hope they were able to find out who the asshole was who did it. So, Dunkin' Donut Terrace, let's not meet, and I hope somehow you're rotting away somewhere. If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. Trust Your Gut, Your Dog, or Your Cat by Emil6. This happened 15 years ago when I had just come home from college on winter break. Home this time was not the house I grew up in. My parents had just moved closer to our small city, so it just didn't feel the same to be in a different space. Maybe that's what triggered my worry. In my family, I'm always the one thinking of the worst case scenario, generally distrustful, and mostly seeming like an annoying worrywart. Call it what you will, but it's also the gift of fear, alright? One cold night, my parents had gone to bed upstairs and my dog had followed suit. I thought I'd watch TV in the living room for a bit before going to sleep, settling in on the couch. The living room was at the front of the house, and with the recent move, the shutters on the windows weren't there at the time, only see-through curtains that weren't really drawn. I noted this, but I was used to the rural setting where only ones who could see in were the neighbors we knew so well. I'm watching TV for about a half an hour when the screen cuts out. It goes snowy. This was back in the day when you watched whatever your local cable channels brought you. I looked up from whatever I was doing, texting, maybe with a flip phone, at first thinking, well, that sucks, but something felt off. I tried the remote, but no other channels worked, so I was sitting there thinking what I should do instead, when my cat jumps up onto the windowsill and starts wailing. What the? This might seem innocuous, but anyone who knew my cat knew this was not par for the course. He was pacing and wailing at the window. A feeling of dread washed through me, and I was frozen. That feeling of dread is so fiercely visceral.
What the hell is going on? What is out there? I tried to settle myself down in this unfamiliar, dark house and felt a bit better because what are the chances? But then there it was. I swear on all that I have that this cold waft of air blew through, and then I heard the side door. I didn't realize that door was even there at the time. I heard a door on the side of the house and felt cold air. I became unfrozen and bolted. I ran upstairs to wake my parents and slumbering dog, and frantically telling them someone is trying to get in the house. They, I think, were annoyed. I'm a worrier, remember? Still, they get up and I think try to placate me by looking around the house. They go check all the rooms, including the basement, while I'm scared and exasperated. They are sleepily roaming around into dark rooms unarmed when God knows who has probably made it inside already. Well, they didn't find anything. They verbally patted me on the head and said goodnight, and I felt foolish. That is until the next morning. I don't know what prompted my parents to call the police, but they showed up and asked me how I knew someone was out there. Whoa, hold on, what? I still answered. Well, the cat was meowing a lot on the window and my voice trailed off, waiting for reaction I usually get. When I got the cop smirking. A cat, huh? Kiba? Get on with it. He goes on to say that someone cut the cable wires on the side of the house, that either someone or someone's thought that they were disarming some alarm, or they saw me sitting watching TV and wanted to mess with me. And the side door? Muddy grounds gave the ability to see fresh tracks right up to it. It didn't look like it had been fooled with, but I know what I heard, whatever it was. I knew it, I said to my parents. The triumph feeling was short-lived when I started to mull what I was so sure about had been true. True, I did know someone was out there. I also knew I would always check that side door and take some cues from the cat, just to be safe. That time I crossed paths with a convicted serial killer. By Snoo Donkey 5457. This happened a long time ago. I'm guessing back in 2006, and I couldn't have been older than 4 years old at the time, yet I vividly remember the fear I felt during this encounter. It was an early summer morning and the sun was up, but a few people were out. In fact, the streets were practically dead that morning. My mom decided to take my sister, only 1 year old, sitting in a stroller, and I to throw away some garbage at the garbage station. I might add that the garbage station is kind of secluded from nearby houses, bordering one of those deep, dark forests of eastern Sweden. Since I was only 4 years old when this happened, the memories from this incident have faded a lot. However, my mom remembers all of it. She says that upon entering the garbage station, she immediately got an eerie feeling of being watched. I remember that feeling too. I felt creeped out, even though I didn't know why I was scared. I guess I could sense my mom's fear. Walking along the secluded garbage station, my mom suddenly stopped and told me this. Opie, hold on to the stroller as hard as you can and don't let go, no matter what. That's my most vivid memory of all of this, and I don't think I'll ever forget those words. I'll at least never forget how they made me feel. It was as if my blood turned to ice. I just froze. My mom sounds stern, but even as a toddler, you can sense when someone is that scared. My mom was definitely afraid of something. The rest is just a blur. I don't remember much apart from the aforementioned, so I'll let the rest of the story be told from the perspective of my mother. This is the recollection of her experience, recalled to the best of my ability, but in my own words. Not far from where we were standing, a truck was parked with a man seated in the front. Nothing unusual. A lot of truck drivers stopped to rest by the side of the road. But this man was staring. He wouldn't stop staring. He stared right at me, examining my body with this determined gaze of a predator. Gluing the three of us in his sights, he truly seemed pleased by the fear he instilled in our faces. And his eyes, they were something else. Almost as if they didn't belong to a human, but rather a predator of the savannah. I felt like prey, stuck in the claws of a lion. I just couldn't move. That's when he smiled at me. I remember that dead smile, those cold, calculating eyes, and the way he licked his lips. Almost as if to say, I could kill you if I wanted to. I believe this was the point in time into the strange encounter when my mom told me to hold on to the stroller, to hold on tightly and not let go. My mom is a small woman, 160 centimeters, weighing only 55 kilograms, about 5 foot, 100 pounds. And she could easily have been overpowered by this overweight man in the truck. My mom later admitted she was afraid he'd jump out of that truck and knock her over, possibly assaulting her, or even kidnapping me and my 1-year-old sister. We bolted out of there. We didn't even throw away much garbage that morning. We just turned around and walked home as fast as my mom could do, with a stroller and a 4-year-old toddler by her side. We never talked about what happened that day, up until very recently. This incident has always lingered somewhere in the back of my mind as that weird thing that happened when I was a child, and every time I walk past that garbage station, I get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. As previously mentioned, this happened in 2006. Fast forward to 2008, the face of a 10-year-old little girl called Angela was printed across the front of the page of every newspaper in sight. She had been abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered, and the perpetrator was an overweight truck driver named Anders Öcklund, now known as one of Sweden's most infamous killers. Anders Öcklund was charged with the murder of Angela alongside the sexual assault and murder of a woman named Pernilla. He is also suspected of abducting another little girl who's still missing, making him a pedophile and a serial sexual assaulter and a serial killer. My mom says that when she saw Öcklund's picture in the paper, especially when she saw those cold, familiar eyes, she knew he was the creepy man from the garbage station that early morning all those years ago. Thinking how my mom, or my sister, or me, or all of us could have been his victims, that sends chills up my spine. Anders, even though you're behind bars, let's not ever meet again. They say what is dead should stay dead. Someone should inform my wife of that. You can find a lot of things on the internet. Information on murders, knives of various sizes, information on forensics and locations of empty fields. And my personal favorite, a new friend with which to celebrate all of these things. Deep web story. This happened a couple of years ago. I don't remember the exact month or year, but it couldn't have been more than a few years ago because Bitcoin was at or near its peak. I used to spend a lot of time on the deep web, mostly on forums and things like that, but never on anything that was explicitly illegal. I know, that sounds incredibly convincing, right? Believe it or not, there are pages on the deep web that are good for entertainment. Some of them are in the gray area as far as ethics go, but again, not explicitly illegal. And some of them only become illegal if you take action on the page, I think. Look, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know. Anyways, I was browsing the pages without intending to actually do anything on them and was just perusing through random onion links to see what interesting stuff I could find. After checking some random pages that sold things that were definitely not legal, I found a page that was, well, again, definitely not legal. From the start on the page, I knew that this page was serious. The name of the page was something like Lee H. Oswald Solutions, an obvious allusion to Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who assassinated JFK. Honestly, seeing that made me chuckle. Something about using Oswald's name for the page was genuinely humorous. After reading the information, it was pretty clear why they used that as the name. The entire page was meant for users to pay Bitcoin and hire a hitman. The page explained that they had top-tier men working for them and price categories as well. The product started at intimidation and included things like arson, murder designed to look like failed robbery, and had other tiers that were meant to make it look like an accident. The last one was the most expensive, obviously, and they gave scenarios on how it could happen, including hiking accident, accidental drowning, and car troubles. Now, I had no intention of doing anything on this page other than reading what they had to say, mostly for entertainment. But then I got to the bottom of the main page. They had a full-on legal disclosure, which I thought was hilarious, that explained what actions could be taken if they failed and laid out their personal guarantee that they could find anyone and everyone without fail. Immediately after this was a small note on the bottom: we can find anyone and we can prove it. Click here for proof. Now, I know what you're thinking. No sane person would ever click that link, and no one could be stupid as to click it intentionally. I didn't want to, but I had to. I had to know how they could guarantee they could find anyone. So, I clicked the bottom of the page and switched over to a plain black site with a smiley face and an hourglass icon that indicated it was loading. After a few seconds, the hourglass turned into a checkmark. At first, I thought that was it. It was just going to sit there with a checkmark, and that was it. Then, much to my surprise, my cell phone started ringing. Obviously, I was freaking out inside, but I answered my phone anyways. I said hello, and the voice on the other side was digitalized, thankfully. It basically said, "Here's your proof. Thank you for considering our services," a few times, then hung up. I was actually grateful that it was a robocall and not a real person, but I was also terrified that they were able to find my number and call me. This was enough to tell me they weren't screwing around and that I needed to never go to their website or question whether or not these hitman sites are legit ever again. The house creaked as Ivan walked the rooms. Upon entering the master bedroom, he saw the ghost of the past owner standing there with a killer smile. Campsite. As it's been stated in a number of other stories on the net about the dark web, if you don't have a reason to be on the dark web, then stay off of it. Obviously, I recommend understanding the technology. Get to know what a VPN is, and understand how Tor and encryption all works. But only for the sake of knowledge and an understanding of security. I'm all about understanding technology and really getting to know the layers of the internet. But don't go looking for illegal and questionable content, because if you look, you will find it. That said, moving on to the story that I wanted to share. This happened several years ago, and I would say early to mid-2000s at the latest. This was a time before the internet was a huge entity that everyone spent all their time on, when broadband was like 10 megabytes per second at most, and Newgrounds was the king of the internet. Back then, I was actually a contractor for web development. People and organizations that wanted to have their presence on the net would contact me and would discuss what they wanted, then build out the website for them. These weren't those complex websites like what exists now. They were more like pages with static content and pictures, basically just, this is our company and what we do, pages. It was a good paying gig. Back in the early 2000s, a lot of companies want their presence on the web, and I worked with a lot of corporations. It's not super relevant, but it helps to, 1, let you know how old I am, and 2, let you know that I understand technology and how the web works. Back then, I was always on the web, looking into competition sites and seeing what worked where and pulling inspiration from things that already existed. At one point, I was talking to a buddy of mine, another tech person, and he brought up that I should consider looking at the dark web for some inspiration. At first, I was a bit confused. The only thing I knew about the dark web was that it wasn't easy to get onto, and that's where the hackers and criminals hung out on the web. I asked him why he thought I should go to the dark web, and he made a point that I couldn't refute. He mentioned that I would probably be the only person in the area that built a website that had seen part of the dark web/deep web. Basically, he was saying that I would have a leg up on everyone because I would have an idea that they wouldn't have. I kinda agreed with him, so after chatting with him, he had convinced me that I had him come over and set up my system for accessing the dark web. I got on and started to go through random sites and trying to avoid anything that could be illegal, and I found a neat site that worked like wiki. I don't think it was actually the deep web wiki or anything like that, but it was a collection of links very similar to it, and some of them worked. For the most part, they ended up just on a dead end with nothing on the other side, but some of them were interesting forums and just pages with information about random things. I was happily clicking along when I came across a page that kind of looked like the original version of YouTube. If anyone has been around for a while, then you know what I mean. Old blocky page with star ratings on the videos. What was weird to me was a lot of the front page videos were just black screens, and when I clicked on them, they had an overlay that said something along the lines of, "Video has expired." What was strange to me was that the title of the videos were just single words. The first one I clicked on was titled Hang, then there was another one was called Electric, and one called Pain. Obviously, these were a bit ominous, but there wasn't much on the screen for the video, just the title and a star rating. Hang had a 5-star rating and it showed that it was rated 40 times, for instance. I was scrolling through the front page and I finally found a video that didn't have a black box overlay. It was titled Shoot. The thumbnail for the video was a guy literally sitting in a nearly empty room that was trashed. I clicked the video and it started up pretty quickly. I don't know why, but part of me was sitting there thinking it was going to be a fairly normal video, that it was going to be some sort of vlog or something from the guy in the thumbnail. Instead, what I got was a video of a guy sitting in a dingy looking room with a syringe in his hand. As much as I wanted to click away, I just sat there and watched this video as it played out. As the camera started, he was just sitting there and staring at the camera. It looked like he nodded to someone behind the camera. After a second or two, the audio cut in and I heard him say something like, "For 300, right?" And then a voice said yes. He nodded and glanced back to the camera and basically started saying his name and location. I don't remember where he was, but he said his name was Jeff and that he was doing this for the site for an amount of money equal to 300, and that this video would serve as his contract. Then he ended with, "And remember kids, don't do drugs." Then, after a second, he situated himself in the chair and tied off part of his arm. Then he looked at the syringe and shoved it into his arm. Long story short, he shot whatever was in the syringe, I want to assume it was heroin, into his arm. And he was doing this for money. My guess is that this site was set up for people to do whatever the audience, and they would get paid for doing it. It was like some sort of dark web YouTube or Twitch for people to pay and watch what happens to people in certain situations. Watching this guy have a reaction to the drugs that he put into his arm was horrifying. He seriously collapsed on the floor and started convulsing, and I really don't want to remember the rest of it. I clicked off it and went back to the main page, and at that point other videos became clear. Hang, electrical, pain. All of these videos of people doing something to themselves for payment. The fact that Hang had a high rating didn't really bode well to me at this point. I could only imagine what happened on that video that got people to rate it 5 stars. After watching this guy drop to the floor after injecting, again, I'm assuming it's heroin, I wasn't very curious on the website anymore. I closed the page and decided that I was done with all of that. And honestly, the sight of that guy and the thought of what the other videos most likely contained has seriously haunted me ever since. I opened my eyes as the sun touched my face and the smell of fresh air and grass hit my nostrils. I began to softly cry, wondering when I would get out of this hole. Joe broke through a window of an abandoned building, looking for shelter from the rain. Looking up, he sees a man standing there with a bloody axe in his hand. Dark Web Story 2. This story goes back a few years. I don't recall the exact years, but it was probably between 2010 and 2011. I would have been 20 because I was living with my parents but attending night college classes. Not really important, but it does help to explain that I wasn't a kid at the time and I should have known better. Anyways, like a lot of people that have an understanding of surface web versus deep web, I was dumb and curious. There was this one guy in one of my classes that was obviously a basement dweller. Not trying to be rude, he just looked the part. I'm not going to describe him. You know the stereotype. But let's call him Jason. Jason was a bit antisocial, but he and I were decent friends due to our mutual interest in technology. I remember that there was this one night that class let out early. He and I were in the lounge on campus and we're talking about random tech stuff. He brought up the dark web, and at the time I wasn't really knowledgeable on what exactly it was. His explanation was pretty straightforward. It was a collection of sites and pages that were essentially hidden from everyday users, and because of this, it was rife with illegal activity. At first, his explanation was enough to make me lose interest. But then he started showing me the pages that he used. He said that the main one was basically a bulletin board for like 4chan, but better. He warned me that some of it was questionable, but there were sections where people would talk about philosophy, new technology, politics, and conspiracy theories. Now, I'm a bit of a conspiracy nut, not in that I believe them, but that I love to read them and see what people think. Obviously, some of them are completely insane, but there are some theories that are interesting and really get you thinking. When Jason told me about the conspiracy board, it caught my attention. I told him that I wanted to get in on it, and he gave me a look that basically said, "I don't think you should be doing this." I told him that I understood the risk and that I would take any precaution that he suggested. I guess that was enough to convince him, and he gave me a list of things to do when I got home in order to get on the site. He then gave me the onion link to the page, and that was that. I went home and got on my desktop downstairs and set up everything he had said to set up. From there, I got on the bulletin and spent the entire night reading various conspiracy theories and paranoid explanations. Honestly, it was the highlight of the year. There were some of the craziest theories I have ever read. After a few days, I started to feel a bit more comfortable and started commenting on posts. For the most part, I would prod for more information, and people were shockingly respectful. I was genuinely surprised how straightforward the posts were, and that people seemed almost decent. And most of them were fairly dismissive to the less than desirable theories out there, ones that were against certain races or religions. To be completely honest, this page felt more like a surface web page. They were mostly respectful and open to discussion. The only reason I can think this was in a deep website would be that they wanted a place to call their own and not to get a ton of traffic. Then it all went south fast. There was this one post where the theorists started in on something interesting, but then immediately turned their entire theory into a pile of racist drivel. There weren't any comments on this post yet, so I decided to comment and be a bit of an ass to this guy. Maybe the autonomy had gotten to me, but I posted something like, "Get your racist BS off the board. Your kind isn't welcome here." It was a basic comment, and I was satisfied that others would back me up and that this guy would get the hint and go away. After a few minutes, I went back to the post to see if there were any responses. No surprise, there was. I opened the thread and there was only one comment from the original poster, and it said the following: "F off, David." I was a bit shocked. My name, in fact, is David, but I had no idea how he could have known that. I started to think back to whether or not maybe I had posted my name in another thread, if he had somehow linked me to that post. I had followed all of Jason's recommendations and covered my track in every way he had recommended. I decided to feign ignorance and comment with, "My name's not David. Nice try though." I think that's where I made my biggest mistake. I shouldn't have challenged him. I should have ignored him and moved on. He replied within a few moments, "Oh really? You're not David, last name, living with Carol and Larry, last name, at 1706 street name in Asheville, Virginia, attending college name, and working part-time at my workplace." I was completely in awe. This person had completely gathered all my personal information within a matter of a few minutes. And it was completely accurate. I was honestly sweating at the prospect of this dark web rando knowing exactly who I was. I decided I would comment one more time and basically concede the conversation. I wrote, "You win, I'll shut up," or something like that. There may have been more panic in my comment than that. I went back after a few moments and noticed that the original comment was gone, and in its place was the following: "Overwritten by Maud, to David. I'll remove your info this time as a courtesy, but it's best you keep your mouth shut from now on. Also, get a VPN. Your current one is leaking your IP." Apparently, the VPN Jason told me to use had an information leak, one that he wasn't aware of, and one that gave away my actual location and registered information. I told Jason about what happened, and he laughed at me. He told me it was my fault because I didn't have an IP check while connected to see if my info was hidden. He was right. That was part of his checklist. That's my dark web story, and it's my only dark web story, mostly because I never went back. "Honey," I shouted up the stairs, "I think we need to talk." "Is it about the head in the freezer?" she responded. "I just needed a place to hide it until they stopped suspecting me." Human meat. Hey everyone, I wanted to post this story up in hopes of explaining the horrors that you can actually find on the dark web. Honestly, most of the things you'll find on the dark web aren't actually the horror movie cliche-laden websites that everyone seems to think they are. Most of the dark web is questionable or illegal adult content, people trying to buy medications illegally, etc. If you're wanting something like what you see in the movies, you have to actually know where to look, as in having the onion link. I'm not saying that those things don't exist, they just aren't as easily and readily available. A lot of people tend to think it's like a dark vision of Google where you can search for crazy stuff and be given results within a few moments. It's really not. Anyways, that out of the way, I wanted to talk about a dark web experience that was honestly horrifying for my friends and I. This was several years ago. I think we were 17 at the time, and we thought we were hackers. I know, it sounds stupid, but the three of us were all about the nerdy crap, Python, networking, and again, quote unquote, hacking. I'll spare myself the embarrassment and explain all of that. Just know that we knew our way around a computer. Naturally, the three of us gravitated towards a place like Reddit, then 4chan, and such. I don't remember where we heard about the dark web, probably from a friend, the news, or one of those aforementioned websites. But when we learned about the difference between surface web and dark web, our curiosity was piqued. We started looking into what it was, what was out there, and what we could do. And, of course, we were enchanted with the hacker haven it was glorified to be. We thought we would get on there, look at some of the questionable sites, and be the coolest kids because we accessed content that others didn't know existed. So, we did what we had to do, loaded up Tor, got information for some onion links, and got ready to have our minds blown. Of course, it ended up not being as interesting as we thought it was going to be. The sites were plain and bland. We saw a couple of sites selling pills, others we didn't even bother scrolling through because of the front pages, and a few webcam sites that we honestly weren't interested in. I think all of us were getting a bit disappointed in what we were finding, though I don't know what we were expecting to find really. I think we started just clicking through and going anywhere and everywhere we could get to. Looking back, this was a really stupid idea. After clicking around for a while, we ended up on a page that looked a little flashier than the others. I don't remember the name of the page, but I think it was something along the lines of your choice, or something like that. As we stared at the homepage, the whole page looked like it was a site for a butcher shop. There were a number of pictures of meat slices and cuts all over the front page, explaining the quality and what seasonings went best with each piece. Unfortunately, I think you all can see where this is going. We ended up on a page with a list of cuts, and each of them had a diagram of a person. The parts where the meat came from was highlighted. Some of what was on the page was horribly graphic, so I won't explain it in this story, but you can imagine what was there. One of the most disturbing parts of this website was its explanation of its sourcing. I recall it explaining that all packages would be discreet and they would include their own seasoning packet that would go best with what you chose. What was worse, they explained that all their meat was fresh and sourced on demand. They touted the fact that they had the ability to get anything when it was ordered. Obviously, we were freaked out by seeing this kind of meat. We got off the site and pretty much immediately removed Tor. We all kept on our pursuits in the IT world, but I don't think any of us have ever been back on the dark web since. The sweet aroma of tomatoes, carrots, and onions hit my nostrils. I knew the beautiful smell would soon turn horrid as my flesh began to cook. As I woke from a pleasant dream, a female voice asked, "You rest well, honey?" Problem is, I live alone. What Happened to My Dog? By Pugaloog 14. Recently, we had a pool put into the backyard. In the construction process, the pool company cut through all the landscaping lights while they were digging the hole for the pool. The pool is finished, the landscaping is all done. All that was left was to get the lights up and running again. But until that happened, it was really dark in our backyard. Our 3 dogs use the backyard to do their nightly business before we go to bed, and either my husband or I go out with them. One is a sweet rescue lab/colleague mix, and the other 2 are pugs. About a month ago, as is routine every night, I put on my coat and opened the back door to take the dogs out. Again, it was very dark. It was cold and cloudy, no moon sort of night. My yard is narrowish but fairly deep with a lot of huge old trees. The dogs and I went outside, and I was sorta half hopping along the patio trying to put my boots on, while the dogs are jumping and running around me, excited to be outside to pee and get treats. In case you're wondering, the entire yard is totally fenced in, our pool is covered, and has a separate fence around it, so that it's dog and child friendly. Anyway, initially the dogs stay close to me, but suddenly, as I'm hopping along the patio trying to finish putting on my boots, my rescue dog takes off like a shot into the darkness, barking and snarling aggressively, while the puggos follow behind. I panic. This doesn't normally happen. Usually they like to stick close to me. I'm now thinking there must be an animal, a skunk, a raccoon, or God forbid a coyote in our yard. Thankfully, my pugs aren't nearly as brave as to venture into the abyss of the dark yard. So they amble back to me, still barking, and unsuccessfully trying to sound tough.
I managed to grab them, and they stopped barking. But my rescue girl is still in the dark, barking more fiercely than I've ever heard her. Suddenly, though, she lets out the most god-awful yelp. Then silence. I listen, but she stays quiet. I scream my dog's name and run awkwardly into the dark, and both chubby pugs under my arms, terrified. I find my girl laying flat out on her side. I didn't know what to do. I still now had 2 squirming pugs in my arms, and she seemed really hurt. At the same time that I reached my dog, the motion sensor in my neighbor's yard goes off. I don't have my phone on me, so I can't call my husband for help, and I don't want to leave my dog alone. I can see my dog's outline, and now that there's enough light coming from the neighbors to let me sort of examine her. No cuts or bites from another animal that I can see, but she's still on her side. She tries to get up, but at first she can't. I'm focused on her, but I'm still adequately aware that it was weird coincidence that my neighbor's light went on just as my dog was hurt. My dog then sort of pushes herself up in one motion and she limp walks, but with purpose, beeline back to the house. It was obvious she wanted to get back to the safety of inside. I kept coaxing her. That's it, girl. Come on, girl. I keep looking behind me, around me. Every hair on the back of my neck is standing up. By the time we get to the house, she seems fine. She is not limping and seems to have walked it off quickly, which I'm grateful for. I open the back door and yell for my husband. I tell him what happens. We look her over, no cuts or bites. We check her paws, nothing. Our theory is that we believe someone was in our yard, in the dark, and our dog surprised them, and when my rescue ran up to them, snarling and barking, they kicked her and then proceeded to hop the fence, triggering the neighbor's motion sensor light. She was checked out and totally okay. No internal injuries, and continues to live her best life. Not sure who or what was in the darkness that night, but we got our lights up and running soon afterwards. If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. Creepy Carpool by Queen C. Hello to all. I'm here tonight to share something that happened to me back in 2018. First of all, I will set the context. I was living in Berlin, Germany, and my boyfriend, at the time, lived 5 hours drive away. So, I was planning to go see him, like every fortnight for the weekend, and I used the carpooling site BabbleCar. I have used so many times before, and that there is already one seat taken by another girl. So I reserve my seat and wait for this person to come and fetch me. We meet up at the spot we agreed to, and he explains to me that the other girl had cancelled last minute, which is totally fine. Odd, but I mean, it can happen. Anyway, I jump in. The driver, Ben, seems very nice and talkative. Just before leaving Berlin, he turns to me and explains that he has forgotten his driver's license at home and that we must go fetch it. Which is already a bit of a pain, cause it's the other side of town and Berlin is big. And let's be honest, you know you are going away for the whole weekend and that you have a really big journey and you forget your license? Anyway, moving on. We go to his and he parks up and turns to me and says, "Would you like to come in with me and visit my place?" I was like, no thank you. Off we go. He's talking away, and all of a sudden starts touching my thigh and explains that he is a personal trainer and massager. And I was like, cool for you. I made it quite clear that I was heading to my boyfriend's and that I was not comfortable. He continues touching my hands, my thighs, and my neck. And to that point, I was like, do I get out? I mean, I'm on a motorway already about 2 hours away from Berlin, and it is traffic jammed, so 5 hours end up being 7 hours. My plan was to pretend to be asleep. I thought, that way I don't have to interact with him, and he might leave me alone. Thing is, I really fell asleep, and when I woke up, I realized I'm in the middle of nowhere, like on a tiny road in the middle of a forest, and the guy turns to me and says, you know, if I wanted to, I could kidnap you and take you into the woods. I played tough and said, you don't scare me, and I planned for all situations. He took no notice, and my boyfriend rang me at that point. I explained and kept him posted. So, as we continue out of the woods, he decides it's now time to eat, so we lose another 45 minutes while he does his own thing. I basically tell him I'm fed up and want no more stops, and he tells me that he is tired and that in order to do so and keep him awake, I must massage him. I felt totally stuck, so I briefly touched his neck, as in to say, now move. We arrived, finally. My boyfriend was not there waiting for me, because I did not want to fight. I reported him to the carpool site, and he has now been banned. There. I hope it never happens to anyone else. Hey, don't forget to leave a comment and tell me what you think down below. I really wish I could have done something. By Nintendo Doll 89. Sorry this is so long. I think I just need to get it out fully. This happened back in early 2005. I was 15 and a sophomore in high school. While I had a lot of friends at school, my closest friend had strict parents. I wasn't able to hang out with them outside of school until senior year. I would get bored on the weekends and take frequent walks around the neighborhood, sometimes stopping at 7-Eleven or Starbucks to buy a snack or a coffee. On this particular Sunday, I was taking a shower before I left. My hair was still wet. I remember walking outside and thinking, it looks like it's going to rain. Maybe I shouldn't take a walk today. Against my better judgment, I took my walk. I encountered a stray dog, which was odd to me since I rarely saw stray or lost dogs in my neighborhood. She was obviously heavily pregnant. Her nipples were swollen, but didn't show any signs of prior suckling. I tried approaching her, but she was very protective and growled at me. We were on a busy street, and I debated calling animal control to pick her up, but she just kept on walking. There was no way I'd be able to hold her in one place with how aggressive she was. I got sad and said, I'm sorry, I can't help you, and walked in the opposite direction. I have two different usual routes on my walk. I opted for the second one after feeling defeated about the stray dog. I walked a little over half a mile up the nearest street after I turned around and got to the next busiest street. During this time, it finally starts to rain. To my surprise, I saw the stray dog again. As soon as she noticed me walking down her same path, she ran across the street, nearly getting hit by an oncoming car. She made her cross the street and started to bark at me. I debated about calling animal control. Maybe I could distract her long enough for them to come get her. No luck. She ended up walking into the townhouse complex she was in front of. I still feel guilty about what I could have done for her. I started my walk back home then. A moment later, a white SUV at the stoplight got closer to the curb. I ignored it. I then heard someone call out, "Excuse me." I turned around. From a distance, I thought the guy driving the SUV was my friend's dad. He had the same model vehicle, and the driver looked like him. As I got closer to this guy's vehicle, my stomach sank. It wasn't him. I had no idea who this man was. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. I felt uncomfortable, but tried to be friendly. "No, thanks. I live a few blocks away." I gestured my head to the south. He was persistent. "There's no trouble. I'm going that way. Let me take you home." In that moment, I remember my hair was still wet from the shower earlier. I must have looked kind of pathetic. My clothes weren't soaked, though. "No, really, it's fine, sir," I said. "Really, it's no trouble. Come on, it's raining." At this point, I'm fed up, along with the honking cars behind him, as the light had changed green. "No, fuck off, you fucking creepy scumbag." I booked it down the road and ran as fast as I could for a couple of blocks until my lungs couldn't take it anymore. I did look back to see which direction he went, and he drove straight on. He was not going in my same direction. I only told a few of my friends the next day at school. Most of them said I dodged a bullet, but a few said maybe he was just a good Samaritan trying to help. I tried telling my school, but since it happened on the weekend, they said they couldn't do anything. I had figured I'd never know until earlier tonight when I looked up crimes in my hometown. I googled my hometown's name and human trafficking. I found an article about a man in his late 50s soliciting a 16-year-old girl online and paying her for sex. The incident happened in 2013, and he was arrested and charged in 2015. He admitted to having other victims, but none of them ever came forward. None of the articles had pictures of him in them, so I googled his name. Sure enough, it's the same guy. I still remember his face and the creepy way he smiled when I kept saying no. Old Man and the White Van by Anonymous Among Us. Back in '92, Mortal Kombat had come out in the arcades. Being a 12-year-old boy at the time, I was hooked on it. Lucky for me, there was an arcade 3 miles from where I lived. It was inside Union Station in Minneapolis. Back in those days, it was really common for kids my age to leave the house in the morning and not come back until dark. Anytime I was bored and had a few dollars, I'd walk down there and play some games. I got so good at Mortal Kombat that I could sometimes make a few dollars last me over an hour. I would sometimes go with friends, but often alone. So one day, I had $5 on me and really wanted to play some Mortal Kombat. I left around 5:30 p.m. I would walk north up Meridian Street all the way. There were some businesses along the way that would then give over to houses before you back to another business's area. Just as I was passing Spruce Deli, I noticed a white van heading south. The driver was a white man who looked to be in his 60s with short white hair and a handlebar mustache. He had a beefy build. As he drove past, he stretched his neck around so he could keep a looking at me. I thought it was weird, but dismissed it. I get another block down the road, and here comes the van again. It had some rust-out parts that made it easy to identify. I wasn't really nervous yet, as he hadn't really done anything. As he went past, it was the same behavior as before. He drove much slower this time, trying to keep his eye on me as long as possible. Okay, now I was officially creeped out. I still had about a mile to go to get to Union Station. After he passed, I could hear his engine rev up and looked behind me to watch him speed the corner and make a right turn. I just knew he was coming back around. I was into an area with houses and cars parked on the street, but nobody was outside. This area was shaded by trees, so I thought I could just duck down and hide. When I saw him coming, I thought, fuck that old guy, I ain't hiding from him. Thought I was tough, even though I was only about 5 foot nothing and 110 pounds. This time, he looked totally changed. His face was red, and he looked to be sweating. His teeth were bared like he was biting down really hard. That was enough to wake me up to what was happening. I ran as fast as I could. I was back in the open now, where there were more businesses again. I could see people now, but that really didn't register to me. I could hear the van speeding up the block on the other side of me. He came around the corner, but I didn't get a look this time. I just kept my vision forward, focusing on running. I finally made it inside Union Station. I ran over to the first payphone I saw and I called home. My mom answered. I told her I really needed her to come pick me up. Some crazy old man was following me. She just said, okay, and told me to stay inside. She was there 10 minutes later. It was all over and forgotten until a week later. I just happened to be walking through the living room. The news was on, and there was the mugshot of the man in the white van. Then there was a shot of a police outside his home, and the white van was parked in the driveway. He had been arrested for attempting kidnapping. I was freaking out again, thinking about what almost happened to me. I never told my mom about it because I was afraid she would stop letting me go out. I think I also blocked it out because I didn't think about it for years.
Please be warned, there is talk of child pornography and dead animals in this video. If this is not your cup of tea, I understand, and I hope to see you again very soon. Welcome, new and old friends. My name is Creepy Train Stalker by Gray. This story takes place when I was around 16 to 17 years old. I lived with just my dad in a little apartment in a questionable area. It was a type of area you'd not want to be out and about when the sun goes down. Up until a certain time, like 10 to 11 p.m., there would be a cop or two in the area patrolling and making sure there are no gang-related activities going on. I had a job at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride or an hour-and-a-half train ride. The train was a couple of blocks away from my place, and since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, that was my main form of transportation. I went to work around 3 p.m. and would usually get home around 12 to 1 a.m. This was my schedule 4 days a week, aside from having school. I would see a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really made conversation with each other. Until one night when I got out of work late because some assholes wanted to sit in the restaurant past closing. Thanks to them, I missed my train. The next one wasn't scheduled to arrive for another hour. So, having nowhere to go and no money for a Lyft or an Uber, I sat there waiting. No one was around me, so when this older man showed up, kinda staggering a bit, I assumed he was another drunk hobo in the city trying to catch a train to sleep in. Something about his face gave me deja vu, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I had seen him on the train here and there. He made his way over to me, much to my discomfort, and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring, but the way he looked down at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out there so late, all by myself. I had to reply as to not anger him. I mean, we were alone. He was close enough to pull out a knife or something. Anyway, I told him I was waiting for the train, and he asked me which one. Now, the train was color-coded with strips at the top to indicate whether it was going north, south, east, or west. I took blue, but I lied and said I took green. He looked at the schedule above the bench and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes, so he said he'd keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, he asked me how long I had been working at the So-So restaurant. This made my blood run ice cold. I never told him where I worked. I looked up at him and very timely answered, "For a year." And he laughed. He said, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point, my skin was itchy out of anxiety. And as soon as the green train came, I knew I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye to him and thanked him for the chat, hoping that would be the end of it. Nope, he suddenly told me he took the green train too, so he followed me on and sat in the seat behind me. My mind was racing about whether he was going to try to do something to me, like chloroform me or hurt me in some other way, but we rode the train in silence. I was trying to figure out how I was going to lose him. There weren't many people riding the train at this hour. Our car was empty, unfortunately. As the ride went on in a menacing silence, I could feel him staring down the back of my head. I waited until we got to a stop where there was another person, and I was so relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding, so I immediately got off the train and the man followed, as expected. I took a seat on the bench next to her, close enough for her to see and hear everything going on, hoping she would catch on. The man noticed that I was sniffling, allergies plus being out in the cold, and asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills he had that were supposedly cold medicine. I denied in a loud voice, "Sorry, I don't accept pills from strangers." This prompted the lady to look at us, and I made eye contact with her. She knew now. Now, this went on until the blue train came and the woman got up, giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So, without explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you sit over there," and made him sit a couple seats across from us. He chose the one where he could face us and stare at me the entire time. I was shaking and about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol. I felt safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried he was going to follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she told me his name was Ray. Ray was filled in about everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised me that I could trust him. The two of them waited for me until I got to my stop. The man, still watching me, started to smile widely, resembling the Cheshire cat. He shouted, "This is your place, right?" To which I didn't respond and just gave the woman a hug and thanked her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back, I saw the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit back down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gate of my apartment safely, I thanked him profusely for his help. It chills me to think about how that night would have turned out if I hadn't met up with that woman and her friend. I feel extremely lucky to this day. I never saw that man again and eventually stopped thinking about him, but in the back of my head, that creepy, aroused smile of his was burned into my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder just what else he knew about me. An individual once killed an entire village in one night, and until now, the place remains empty due to the rumors of the killer still being there. That's the story of my hometown. If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. I think there's someone living in my shed. By Crypto Day. Title says it all, but also doesn't say anything. Lately, I've been noticing something off about my home. Like there's something else there with me, my wife and our 2 dogs, but I've never been able to put my finger on it until today. For some context, I live in a duplex. We share the property with another guy in his mid-20s. He has his own house and we have ours, but we share the laundry room that leads to our respective backyards that are separated by a fence. This all started around 2 months ago when the guy sent me a text. "Hey man, just a heads up, someone stole my bike out of the sunroom." This is extra creepy because to get to our sun/laundry room, you would have to hop the brick fence surrounded by shrubbery trees and then hurl the bike over. Unless the thief had the most massive pair of balls ever and walked it through one of our front doors when we weren't home. Either way, I didn't feel right and made more of an effort to keep the door locked. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago, I let my dogs into the backyard and one of them starts sniffing at the shed. No big deal, the lizards are coming out with it heating up. They probably just chased one under the door. I finally got them to come in, but didn't give it much of a thought. I hardly go into that shed. Nothing wrong with it, it's just kinda out of the way and I'm not really hang out in the shed type of guy. So we generally use it for storage, suitcase, furniture that doesn't fit/match the house, camping stuff. You know, boring suburban shit. We probably enter it maybe 3 times a year. After the 18th day in a row of my dog being curious about the shed, I decided to have a little look-see to see if maybe there was a Komodo dragon or something in there since they wouldn't let this thing go. Nope, no Komodo. But what I did find literally made me piss myself just a little bit. Just a few drops. Inside the shed was the bike that my neighbor had stolen a little while back. My first thought was, oh fuck, my wife is a klepto. But quickly ruled that out. She doesn't even like to bike. Then I was briefly worried that my neighbor thought that I was the thief. I mean, it is my shed. I don't know how to explain that if he found out, plus I want to give him his bike back. I kept looking around and found one of our sleeping bags unraveled, but balled up behind a box. Inside of it was a stack of what looked like around $20 in change in singles. There was also a bag for garbage and had a lot of food wrappers inside. Eventually, my brain accepted what it was ultimately denying at first and put 2 and 2 together. Someone, I don't know who, is living in my shed. Or at least was. Maybe my dogs spooked them off, or maybe they sleep there every night and leave during the day. If they weren't coming back, why would they leave the change? I left everything how I found it and thinking about what I should do next. Whoever did it must have gotten it through the spare set of keys I keep hidden in my backyard. I locked it up, brought them inside with me tonight. Hopefully, whoever it is gets the message and moves on. I'm going to install a camera tomorrow. I will keep my eyes updated if anything more happens. Please hope for the best and that this person isn't a lunatic. After climate change put 90% of all landmass underwater, the survivors believed the worst was over. We learned a new form of terror as the awakened Leviathans surfaced from the depths to reclaim their planet. Horrifying Storage Unit Auction Experience by HamFX. My brother and I worked across the street from a mini storage place, and roughly 2 years ago, we noticed that they had an auction sign out front. We decided to check it out, so we walked over, hoping to find something interesting. If you haven't watched Storage Wars, the way these work is the auctioneer opens the unit, and you are not allowed to enter or touch anything. And you only have a window of about 15 seconds to look around and decide if you want to bid. This unit was small, 4 foot by 4 foot, and my brother and I noticed a group of 5 fishing poles amongst other boxes and bags. We had been talking about buying a few poles, and this seemed like a good chance. So we yelled out a low bid and won. Per the auction rules, we had until the end of the day to empty out the unit. Being small, this was a 2 garbage can job. So we got a can and started sorting. It started out promising, with finding a nice microscope, a few tools, etc. Standard storage stuff. Pulling out a plastic garbage bag and open it to find another tied shut garbage bag, which I opened to find another tied shut garbage bag. And since nothing terrifying is ever kept in a triple tied bag, I opened it to find the dried, mummified remains of a very old and very dry cat. My brother and I just stopped and stared at each other. And since neither of us needed a dried out cat at that moment, we weren't sure how to handle this specific piece of storage unit treasure. We did what we always do when faced with something this out of context. We just laughed uncomfortably until we looked back into the unit and noticed 2 more tied garbage bags. At the end of the day, we found 3 bags with parts of or entire cats. We aren't doctors, but we are pretty sure that there was at least some dog parts in there as well. Granted, saying it is a storage unit full of dead cats would be a bit of an exaggeration, but considering that a storage unit generally has no dead cats, I think a small unit with 3 or 4 could be considered full. As if multiple bags of dead cats wasn't bad enough, the creepiest part of the whole thing was finding his or her creepy drawings of cats and a used pink cat food and water bowl. I spoke with the manager of the storage facility and explained my findings. I asked who owned that unit. Obviously, they couldn't give me the name, but when I asked if they were perhaps a vet, the owner laughed and said, "Definitely not." He also said that helps explain why the person's other abandoned unit that had gone up for auction prior had been full of empty plastic cat carriers. Thousands of people on Tinder are looking to give you their hearts, the notification said. Funny, I was actually going after their kidneys. Hey, don't forget to leave a comment and tell me what you think down below. My primary school grade 6 teacher, Colin Lyons, was found to be a pedophile, and he got away with it all. By Butcher Your Face 2000. When I was in primary school, elementary school for the US, I had a mid-50-year-old male teacher who I knew from the start was creepy. All the other teachers and staff talked so highly of him because of how involved in the morning activities he was. He came up with the idea to run a yoga class for the morning sport periods, and he would run the yoga and other teachers would run soccer or cross country or whatever. We were all about 10 or 11 when this started. I would notice how during these yoga classes he favored a couple certain poses. Downward facing dog was his ultimate favorite. He seemed to focus on the female students more than the boys, which of course I thought was weird. He would tell us all to go downward facing dog, keep your head straight to the ground, close your eyes, and breathe. While he would circle around the class and amusingly look at the girls wearing skirts and shorts. Weirdly, he had made it a requirement for girls to only wear shorts or skirts for yoga. It wasn't completely obvious at the time, but I realize now he was recording it all for later usage. Also, he insisted on taking classes of swimming lessons at the beach. He'd be really annoying about changing into a fresh pair of clothes in the changing rooms before going to and from the beach. At the time, I thought fair enough. A couple years later, when I was in high school, I seen on the news that the teacher had up and left school during the middle of a school day with no indication of why or where he went. People worried about him at first, until they realized his secret. A day later, it came out that another teacher found this teacher sneaking camera pen devices. One of many. It turns out that all those years, yoga classes, swimming lessons, God knows what else, he would have his camera pen watching it all. He would leave his jacket hanging up in the girls' changing rooms with the pen camera facing the students, while they got changed for swimming lessons. He was then on the run after being caught out. I assumed he thought he was caught out before he actually was, hence why he left during the middle of the day with no explanation. A couple days later, everything was released to the public. This teacher had been selling and editing child pornography on the dark web. And you bet all the footage from my years at my school was a part of it. Some girls at my school were seen repeatedly in all the footage. Naked, vulnerable, and young. I'm not sure as to whether he did the same to us boys, but regardless, he was filming and distributing videos of my peers to other pedophiles for money, and probably his own sexual pleasure for years. They found piles and piles of footage on his home computer in the same house his kids and wife lived in, oblivious to his true nature. He was eventually caught by the police, brought before a judge, and on behalf of his psychologist, he got away with it all. His psychologist apparently pleaded that the teacher was suffering from depression and other mental illness, and that it would not be fair to put him in prison. I have no clue why the judge felt pity for this man, but to my knowledge, he is in protective custody somewhere else away from where angry parents and teachers could find him. I'm sure he's still doing similar shit today, whatever way possible. It makes me sick to think about this man being put on such a pedestal by other teachers and staff during his schooling days. They all assumed he was a passionate teacher who wanted to see kids reach their potential. In reality, he had become a teacher to fill his sick urges, which he would still be catering to this day. This teacher's name is Cullen Lyons, and I'll put a link in the description about his incident. There are 2 articles down there. The first article is just when they were looking for him, and the second is about the pen cameras. Now I'm going to read you the update. Update. The second article, which includes an incriminating story of Mr. Lyons' pen camera child pornography scandal, can no longer be linked to Cullen Lyons. The second article refuses to give his name, I'm assuming because he's in protective custody and he made some sort of deal to wipe his name from anything negative online. I vividly remember seeing the article, having my entire high school talking about it during assemblies and meetings. I know it happened, and so does everyone that I went to school with. I'm so frustrated that this man gets a free pass and everyone that wants to research his disgusting acts can no longer have proof. He is only known online now as a beautiful man thanks to the first article. This pisses me off greatly. No man that gains the trust of his students, friends, and peers just to hoodwink them all with his pedophilic ways should be allowed to have their slate wiped clean. and be known to anyone that researches him as a good person. Fuck you, Mr. Lyons, and I hope you're dead or suffering. I don't normally give commentary or my points of view after I read a story, but this one, I'm making an exception. So in the second article, it says, the 50-year-old man who cannot be identified due to a suppression order, which means to me, he made some kind of deal to get his name expunged, which is sickening. I cannot 100% prove that the user is telling the complete truth because the evidence isn't there. But at the same time, the user is still brave enough to share this story. So, what I'm asking you guys to do, even though I'm a small, itty-bitty channel of only 402 subscribers, I want you to share this video. I want more people to know that there might be a predator still out there who might still be recording children and selling it on the internet. I sat in the tree to hide from my family. But when I looked up, I knew I should have been running. I do hope you enjoyed this compilation. And if you did, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, well, subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. If you'd like to help this channel or this podcast, just share it with anyone who might like it. If you'd like to help in other ways, well, I do have a Patreon, merch, and PayPal. If you'd like to see everything I do, check out my website. That's right, I have a website now. So, check out the link down below, and it will show you everything. But as always, thank you for watching and listening. That really means a lot. Sleep tight, and don't let 42 bite.